I'm pleased to welcome Aoife O'Sullivan, partner with the Air law firm, who will introduce his panel. So please come up.
We're off.
Whoops. Stepped into a big hole.
Let's just get one thing straight. I'm most definitely a female. Okay, can I have my panel up, please? Murray Law, Director of Leaburn Limited. Murray, take a seat. Nick Rose, Director of Business Aviation for London City Airport. Mark Swan, who's a Fellow of the Royal Aeronautical, Director of Safety and Aerospace Regulation at the CAA here in the UK. And Stephen Brown, Chief Operating Officer of NBAA. This is going to be far more technical than I'm going to be able for now, so bear with me. I'll try and keep an eye on your questions, but please do feel free to interrupt. Okay, our remit today is solutions. We've raised, and actually the issues that were raised in the first panel lead into your areas of specialisations. So what I thought I would do is literally dive in and throw it at you straight away. In terms of airport access, I guess, Nick, this is one for you at London City. Why are we all so obsessed about getting into Heathrow and London City? I mean, what's wrong with Biggin Hill? Why would we want... Well, let me not put it in the London City context. Let's look at Heathrow. I mean, if I was given an option to avoid Heathrow Airport, and particularly flights to Ireland, where you're walking for 3 miles to get to the gate because it's Ryanair, why wouldn't I want to go to an airport? What's stopping it? Or why are people so obsessed with the major hubs?
Well, in terms of Heathrow, they priced everybody out. So there was obviously a strategy they followed. But you come back to what we're selling. We're selling time more than we sell anything else. The size of the aircraft, my experience with this is the size of the aircraft goes with the personality. But the reality is, everybody wants to go to the same place, and they want the time that using business aviation gives you to be able to do that. So that's why our city pairs are one city pairs London-Paris. It's the most served route. I'm going to say in the world, somebody's going to tell me it isn't, but in terms of the amount of commercial traffic going between the two, and yet that's the business aviation route that everybody wants to use. Number one, city pair. Why? Because you can do it in half the time by using a business jet. Now that relies on access. You've got to be able to get in to somewhere that's remotely close to where you want to go. In London, which is sort of the primary theme here, I'd say we're well serviced in terms of airports. You know, we've got a ring of airfields that go around. Now, in terms of going back in a little bit of history, when I did this with NetJets, there was we got to 2006, and we did a study, and if our growth had continued by 2013, we would have been frozen out, because and that would become the biggest disenfranchiser for growth in the industry, because we wouldn't be able to take people where they want to go. Now, I don't know what that. It's a good time for us to refresh that exercise to see actually what capacity we have going around London to look at when that becomes a disenabler. But in terms of London City's strategy, which I can talk about, I mean we've London City is a bit unique, if you like, in terms of the fact that it's structured by peak. It's a peak airfield, and it's standard constrained. So therefore, we've got a gap during the day, which is not filled with leisure traffic, where it would be normally in other airports, I would say. So business aviation is in part of the long-term plan, and is a healthy chunk of movements. And then we've got we're well serviced with specialised airfields, you know, for Biggin and Farnborough. Now, I understand that commercial airfields are following Heathrow's pattern. So with Heathrow, basically they push the business away, and I feel that that's happened. You know, that we're threatening for that to happen at Luton, and maybe in a long-term plan it stands it. But and it's certainly already out of the Gatwick, so where the number of rooms are so small. So as an industry, we have to talk about solutions. We've got to make sure that we talk with one voice here, you know, because it was back in 2007 or something that I spoke to the boss at Geneva Airport and said, I can't get the guy who owns you in here on a Monday morning, you know, because you won't let him come in, you know. Is that what we want? There are different ways of doing this, and we need to make sure that we talk collectively as an organisation, and that will come onto the regulation side of this, where we need to make sure we're talking with one voice and we understand what's important to us. And in NetJets, the single most important thing was access.
What about the access? You know, now I'm at London City and I've flown in on my G550. The last thing I'm going to do is get on the tube or the light railway. What about access? I mean, haven't you all got the same access into the centre of London? The same problem as Farnborough does, the same problem as Heathrow does? What's the solution for that? Because that's what clients are looking to you for, is get me to where I need to be and don't cause the problems. What's your solution on that? I mean, what are you guys doing to alleviate the problem?
Well, I'm going to tell you, London City is the best served, the airport to best serve the needs of the clients, because 60% of the transportation from London City and from Norfolk, which are the two airfields I can talk about, goes to West 1 or South West 1. It's going to Mayfair or Kensington. So that's where everybody's going. So how you service that, particularly when you're talking about people coming into London, you know, that's part of that needs to be part of the solution. So that needs to, people need to understand what the end destination is and make sure that we follow that in terms of the solutions we provide. So London City, we're 30 minutes from Mayfair, you know, it got screwed up last year with a bus and with a bike lane, and it's now been solved again. But so difficult for me to say. I mean, Norfolk's also is best served for the West End and South West London. So from further out, you look at more innovative solutions, and I'm beginning to look at the helicopters and the helicopter solution.
And the helipad on the Thames, don't forget that one.
Yeah.
Well, and the other reason you're not going to get on the tube is you lose productivity and you lose connectivity, right? And so what people are ultimately after is not only saving time with the airplane, but constantly being connected to the business environment so they can be productive. And so that's why we've seen on aircraft in recent years, the hottest selling, you know, innovation on the airplane is satellite broadband connectivity to the office, so that they're constantly able to work and be productive.
Which is exactly the reason they tell us they got into corporate aviation in the first place. On to regulation, Mark. A lot we talked about earlier, probably one of the biggest issues with the aviation industry is we have a very heavy, influential commercial airline industry that pretty much tells us all what to do. We follow on as the poor cousin, trying to keep up, as Brian has said. You know, we're constantly playing catch up with these people. But then even in our own industry, we don't seem to be all that well tied in that, you know, nobody really knows, or we don't have alignment on things like what is the definition of commercial versus charter versus public transport versus private. What the hell do we all mean? We can't even get that right between us. So isn't that one area that we could start with? Because I can tell you from a legal tax structuring point of view, that causes massive headaches for us, the private in particular. Is that something we could do? Is that anywhere you could start from?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I was putting a challenge out to the business in here, the one big thing I would say controversially is get your act together. Why do I say that? Because, you know, if you look at the scalable nature of regulation, commercial, all the way down to general aviation, you know, the rules are the rules, but they do slide down the scale. If I look in the UK at what we've done over the last 4 years, some of you will be aware of the General Aviation Red Tape Challenge. You know, I know that general aviation contribute 1.4 billion to the economy year on year. I know that general aviation consists of 21,500 pilots per year. I know what their transactions are. I know that one and only point of contact with us is normally in our shared service centre, where we issue them with their licenses, etc., etc. Were you to ask me the same information about business aviation, I would say I know none of that. So there is what resonates, if you look at what we did in the red tape challenge for GA, we stripped away over 3 years to the bone. Some of you who are private pilots in the room should agree with this, I hope. We stripped away to the bone and are still in the process of doing so under that red tape challenge, every piece of regulation that stops GA flyers enjoying their weekend or doing what they want to do in terms of time, cost and money. I give you one example in terms of, I think Brian was talking earlier and Steve about avionics fit. You know, we as the regulator published for lightweight transponders a new standard. I put it out there a year ago now that said to general aviation, you can self-declare to this standard if you want to fit this transponder. And by the way, we will now no longer charge you. To my horror, I discovered my colleagues, when I took over the restructure of our part of the business, charged £3,000 to £5,000 to come and inspect a general aviation airplane to make sure that the avionics fit was okay. Appalling. So where we've gone to in the last couple of years, if I go back to, so get your act together and lobby hard with one voice, what have we done about it in terms of solutions? Well, 2 things. Worked with great people like Mark Bailey, so we've set up the General and Business Strategic Aviation Forum. He is your mouthpiece for strategic matters to do with regulatory engagement. We've set up, alongside Mark and some of the team, the Business Aviation Flight Ops Group for operational issues, and those bear fruit. But I've got 60 people dedicated to facing EASA, interpreting that rule book, and then using, someone mentioned it earlier, alternative means of compliance. We've moved the regulation to what we call a risk-based approach. Could talk forever about that tonight. I'll shut up in a second. But the risk-based approach is designed, which is why whoever was saying earlier, you know, we don't see the inspectors so much and it's a bit burdensome, Actually, the way that you are racked and stacked in my organization now means you get a lot less regulation and a lot less inspectors because you don't need it if you're good at what you do. So the risk-based approach says if you come to us, and we're a service industry just as much as you are, and we have clients, as far as I'm concerned, then provided we understand your risks, provided we understand how you intend to manage them, you should get light touch interpretation of the rules and regulations.
Mark, can't I ask, isn't it fair to say, though, that type of approach, the self-declaration, a bit like Part 8CC, come and tell us what you're doing, and we'll tell you if we agree with it or not, creates an innate lack of confidence within people, because as well, what if they tell me that I'm doing it wrong, and now they know what I'm doing, and I've told them everything I've done. I think what a lot of people look for is, and it's the same with the EASA, I mean, good luck to the 60 people interpreting these rules and keeping up with them. You know, we need to make it easier. Isn't that the point? People, we go out to the rest of the world and we say, come into our industry and we're going to talk in acronyms and we're going to expect you all to understand it and understand how the industry works. But we're going to then say to you, and by the way, self-declare, and we'll tell you if you're right or wrong. Surely there's an easier way to approach all of this.
No, I think self-declare is just one aspect of a tool set that is a sliding scale of capability. So at the light end, when you have something, so let me step back one. We now start everything we do with a conversation that says, what's the risk? Okay, what is the risk? Because we only exist to protect the public. That's why regulators exist. So we have a conversation about risk. If we understand your risk, and you understand your risk, and we come to a meeting of minds, then we can work our way through to fast and flexible, and I get the fact you people are just interested in buying time. I'm interested in selling that to you, either in light touch regulation or in enabling your business. We want to stimulate, not stifle growth. That is actually now part of our growth duty. So it is about the risk conversation. And I think that business model, which is a new business model for regulation, that's what we've been creating over the last 4 years, allows you to have a different conversation than just, am I compliant with this rule? And God forbid you have to go through so many hoops and the costs are so high. It allows you to say, actually, I don't want a conversation about whether I'm compliant with the rule. I want a conversation about whether I'm managing the risks and whether my organizational performance is adequate for you, regulator, to give me these freedoms. And I think that is a different conversation than we've had even 3 or 4 years ago. Certainly in the UK, and there are some in the room who can either testify or contradict me. I don't mind which, it's a debate, so we can have that. Just one more thing. The other solution, and I would say this, wouldn't I, is register your AOC here. We want to be a gold standard regulator, not a gold-plated regulator. So you want good regulation, you want to market it as a selling point, get your AOCs into this country and we'll look after it for you.
Can I throw the elephant in the room at you then?
Of course.
What about Brexit?
Brexit, yeah. So are we worried about Brexit? Yes, a bit. But look, we've been very clear to government in the official capacity, and I sit on the ALSA management board, so I'll be very clear with our European colleagues at that level. We, the regulator, will continue to formally advise the UK government that staying in the ALSA system is the best thing since sliced bread. You might not think that the ALSA system is, but moving away from it, we believe, would be disastrous for regulation. You can think about the cost to all of you in the room who pay to a degree for our services. The cost of rebuilding a regulatory regime would be disastrous. So in terms of Brexit, we would say you just buy into EASA at a reasonably negotiated cost. You guys understand negotiation better than I do, and you just pay the bill. I cannot envisage at the moment, or in 2 years' time, a future without us being bound to the EASA safety system. It just seems ludicrous to me.
Who's flying the flag for corporate aviation, though? I mean, when we're knocking on the door of Theresa May or Tony Blair, whoever ends up in power, God forbid, when we're waving the flag for, not only do we want you to recognise EASA and stay EASA, but we want you to recognise all the things we've been working so diligently on over the last few years. And they say, who are you? And we say, well, we're the overprivileged corporate jet people. Could you look after us too? Who's doing that? Who's going to lobby for us in the next 2 years?
Yeah, so look, you need to lobby for yourself. And you've got a mouthpiece into us, whom we use, and the folk that feed into Mark on a constant basis. I mean, he can pick up the phone to me any time, and we will try and fix your problems for you. But it's been floating around the room. You know, I push it back to you. The thing I first said, you need to get your act together. If I look at the GA Red Tape Challenge, they got themselves a minister, he happened to be Conservative Party chairman, a private pilot, a very vociferous and effective individual who rattled our cage, great stuff. They got a minister with a big flag and an entourage sitting behind him who helped that red tape challenge strip away regulation and save hundreds of thousands of pounds, probably millions in your case. You kind of need that model if you really want to be effective. And I think the conference is thinking they kind of recognise that piece. Disparately herding cats is always difficult, so use the organisations. I think that's the key thing. There are several in the room. Having a single set of key lines that each organisation can mouthpiece on your behalf, I think is critical to success.
That's a fair point. That's a great takeaway, thank you. On to FAA, if I could ask Stephen to comment on this. I'm not going to put you on the spot, yes I am. One of the biggest issues that is coming out more and more is this growing disparity, and I'll put it out there because certainly it is from a legal perspective, of FAA versus EASA. Whether it's licensing, third country operators, cabotage restrictions, etc., etc., etc. It's getting harder and harder to structure, particularly because we in Europe say, whatever you're doing over there in the States, we've got our own rules. And by the way, we expect you to import your aircraft in here, whether you're based here anyway. That's being very facetious, but it's kind of getting to that. Isn't there something you guys could do to help, whether it's this One World Alliance, or can't we just align a little bit more towards ICAO? I mean, do you have any ideas on how that relationship could work better together?
I do. I guess we could capitulate. But I think the reality is, you know, North America, the U.S., Europe are the two largest, most mature aviation markets in the world. For various reasons that many will understand and we can't spend a lot of time on, those two large markets want to compete with, each other to a certain extent. So that competition is going to always drive some difference. I think we try and work diligently on minimizing those differences, but at the very large corporate multinational level, there's a lot of competition and they want to keep that competition going. So it's a challenge, let's say at a government level. I worked for FAA for 6 years. At a government policy level, it's a challenge to overcome a competitive environment that you think largely benefits the public. And so you're going to allow some of that competition to always continue.
Wouldn't it be fair to say, though, that a lot of that competition is amongst operators? It's not necessarily a competition that buyers, owners would be thinking about. If I'm buying an aircraft and I want to have a choice of registering it in because my pilots are FAA, but basing it in Europe, I'm not thinking competition. I'm just thinking, can't you guys just make this easy for me?
Yeah. Well, we could all ascribe a little more closely to the ICAO standard. That would help, minimize some of those differences. And so certainly we encourage our government to do that. I know many others do. But that's not always reciprocated on the manufacturing side or on other sides where there's benefit to competition. But I agree with you fundamentally. We should drive toward implementation of common standards as much as possible and minimize differences. It creates a larger market, which is a more economical and a more efficient market. And that's really what we're after. We're doing a lot of that work ourselves directly in China to try and mature that market and make it much more like the markets we're used to. And we certainly need, to make the same kind of progress in South America and other places. Because ultimately the democratization of the market creates the growth that we've seen, as Brian talked about, here in Europe.
Exactly. Leading nicely into your topic, Murray, which you don't even know is coming at you yet. Similar.
24 hours ago, I wasn't going to be here.
Yeah, exactly. Murray joined last minute, so he's even less knowledge of what's coming at him. Aircraft ownership, your background is sales, acquisitions, etc. I think it's fair to say it's a fairly complex process getting your aircraft. You spot it in the showroom at eBase. You sign your LOI. I mean, they don't do this anymore, but in the heyday, they certainly did. And then you start getting your army advisors around you, the pub lawyers, the all sorts of people, all telling you how different people have done it. My friends all went in, just follow the same structure. What can we do to simplify that? And I'd like to tease this out with you because I think there's an awful lot that the industry could do on this perspective. And it ties into a lot of what you guys have all been saying is we can keep the regulation going, we can keep with the risk approach, but let's give it to the right people. Let's put the operators in charge of operational responsibility and leave it with them. Let's not give it to the buyers who know nothing about FAA, EASA. What's your view on that? And have you any ideas on how to better the market? And off he goes.
I come up with the hardest question. Let me begin by saying that I'm a raving enthusiast for this industry and I spend a lot of my time and effort promoting it because I believe in the industry and its value to the community. I also think that my role here is to perhaps be a bit more provocative than we might usually expect. So if I may, I might pick up on the thought, this is a people business. And us as people haven't got our act together. And if I can draw a couple of parallels, then I will come back to the question because of it. I'm old enough to remember BlackBerry when it was a blue thing that you had in your hand that wasn't even shaped like a phone and it had a keyboard on it, and BlackBerry was the biggest business tool out. And then a fellow called Jobs came along and he said, you know what, these people don't even know what they want. I'm going to design something where they're going to put a camera in a telephone. Where are we now in a very short space of time? And it's because Steve Jobs didn't focus on the telephone, he focused on people and what the people wanted, and the people didn't know what they wanted. And I've heard before a question about marketing, and it frustrates me as a 20-year veteran of this industry whose customers now ask me to tell them what the industry is going to be like in 2027, not 2017, because we're already here. And remember, 2017 is only 10 years ago since 2007, so it's going to go pretty quick. And if I'm going to invest X number of millions in my infrastructure, what industry am I going to have in an environment when the Phenom 300 has been the biggest selling aeroplane for the last 4 years, and they sell more Phenom 300s than the whole of Dassault sell in all their product range? We've got a lot of social change going on. And so the whole thing that you parallel that you have in BlackBerry through to Nokia, remember Nokia was the phone to have, they're not there anymore. So we're going to see this rate of change continuing. And I want to draw one more parallel and the marketing point. If I worked in Coca-Cola and I was in the business of promoting cans of Coke, I would probably spend more time understanding what was happening to the content of the can than I would be thinking about the can. Now, to draw a facetious parallel, we worry a lot about the can. And if you think about how much time we spent in this room tonight talking about our can, and our can's got wings on it, but still a can, it's made of aluminum, we don't know enough about what happens inside the can and why people are using our aeroplane. We think we know. Remember the BlackBerry? We think it's like the BlackBerry, but actually it's now like the iPhone. It's a different environment. So to your question then, I think what we've done is we've made the cost and the complexity of actually owning an aeroplane beyond what is commercially and economic feasible for most small businesses and corporations who have in the past, when Lear invented the Learjet, been the primary market. And so our market is now, as you described, for individuals who are able to reward themselves.
But isn't it, and take it back to your example, the iPhone. I mean, iPhone don't talk to us about product liability, about concerns they have with their tax structures, about, you know, bringing the iPhone into Europe and the problems they had with access in and the VAT issues and all the rest of it. But yet, when we sell the commodity that is corporate aviation, we say, well, come in here and let me just tell you about how complex this can be. And you know, come under this rug here and I'll show you how to get around it. And you know, stay with us because it's a $65 million asset. And by the way, the tax is 20% of that if we get it wrong. But trust me on it, we'll be fine. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
You get on an Etihad aeroplane and a suite at the front, and you fly to where you want to fly to, and you get off at the
No, but that's the big difference because when we do all of this with the principals pay a lot of attention to what you're saying. And you always resolve it for them, of course you do, and you make it as painless as possible. But the reality is, the guys that are buying aircraft don't want charter. They don't want net jets. They don't want to have to charter. They want long-term, exclusive use, choice of interior. I want it to look like my aircraft. I want you to tell everybody it's my aircraft. How we finance it behind the scenes, please don't tell anybody. That's what they want. And we can make that easier. I'm convinced we can make that easier for them and bring more people in.
But we have to
but how we do it is the question.
That's right, and there are many ways of doing it. And I think the start of it is to understand more what it is that those people really want. While we keep thinking that we want people to do business things and all that sort of thing, but actually the aircraft interior isn't suited necessarily to what the family wants or whatever it is. There's a problem with the image. And then you get into this whole question of employment, pilot models, all the liabilities that go with it, the landing fees, and all of that stuff, all comes in to make it complex. We haven't yet figured out, and I don't think, for the year 2027, what these people are going to want us to be doing, because we don't know yet enough about what it is they aspire to in 2027. Any more than BlackBerry managed to foresee what Steve Jobs was going to do to their market. Any more that Nokia could see what Steve Jobs and Samsung were going to do to their market.
Honestly, I don't think it's anything more than give them exclusive use to an aircraft when and how they want it. What you're talking about, though, is what's stopping a small group of a few of us sitting together and saying, you know what, here's what you do. Here's how we get you what you want, and here's how we protect the asset, and here's how we address the risks that you're talking about. It's not beyond the wit of man.
We haven't got our act together.
We haven't got our act together, I think, is the message.
That's the simple answer to all of what I've said. We haven't got our act together. And we sat here, we've talked about the can. Let's not talk about the can. Let's focus on the people, deliver the service.
So, open to the panel then, on the perception question that has come up a lot, and I know EBAA have been doing a lot on this. That whole sitting in front of a corporate, a chairman who has decided, quite rightly, because he flies 1,200 hours per year to make the business what it is, I want to buy an aircraft, help me justify this acquisition to the shareholders, waiving their 5 shares who think I shouldn't. I mean, what do you do with that? How do you help address that? Because telling them you're a big employer of jobs and there's 12,000 jobs here, they don't care. All they're thinking about is the dividend stream that they're not going to get on their shares. How can we address that kind of thing?
So, look, at the end of the day, I think there's no solution other than to tell your own story and to tell the best story you can. I mean, in an era of, populist politics, right? That's going to be the challenge, the perception that you're 1/10 of 1% or 1% or whatever it is. You just have to kind of take that head on. And as Brian suggested, and what we've learned in the work that we've done so far, and we're not perfect and we got a lot more to do, you've got to try and get the business-oriented story out there, because that's what you're engaged in. You're engaged in business. And you've got to, in contrast to just the last few minutes of our conversation, be very clear about the spectrum of business transportation options that exist, right? There's fractional, there's single engine turboprops, there's all kinds of things way beyond the Gulfstreams and the Boeing business jets. And yes, that's really complex stuff. But there are simpler models, there are other alternatives that don't have the sort of populist challenges that maybe the upper end does. And so there's a broad spectrum of customers and buyers. There's a broad spectrum of business aviation. And thank goodness, as Brian pointed out, the bottom end is expanding. And that's very helpful. for the future, even though we can't see it exactly, how it's going to turn out. That's a great evolution and something that we should all support and articulate and make better known.
Why do you think it took until now, Stephen? What stopped that developing until now? Or what's created the change?
You know, I'll speak about it just in the U.S. context. As you all mentioned, it's been helpful to have, you know, ministers, presidents that have been pilots. The Bushes were pilots. You know, Trump is a heavy user, even though he's not a pilot. There's a lot of other things that come with Trump, so I won't talk about those. But that central core message of aviation is productive, it's business-like, it's useful, has been helpful, right? And so even if you don't have that, if you have CEOs that will stand up and speak out, and we do increasingly have that, it's very, very challenging to get the first 5 to do it. But then, you know, you get another 5, and then you get 10, and you get 100, and it makes a difference. And it's just a matter of starting. So you've really got to have people stand up and say, here's where the value is. This is what it's creating for society, not just for my company.
Exactly.
Right?
Can I just pick up on Steve's point? We talk about a lot of this in IVAC as well. Steve Sana and I would probably not want to tell you how many corporate aeroplanes he and I have sold in the last 12 years to publicly listed companies in the UK. But I think I've got enough fingers on my hands. The reality is, the truth is, in this market, not so much about public perception, it's about return on investment, it's about balance sheet and all of that sort of thing. And the truth of the matter is, in this environment, which is very different to the North American environment, publicly listed companies without a major controlling shareholder who makes the decisions are unable to put $70 million on the balance sheet without a commensurate cash flow on the profit and loss account. It's that simple. And when you have residual values that are falling at the rate of $2 million a quarter, which they are at the moment, you are then, in addition to not generating cash on the balance sheet, you are actually therefore increasing or reducing the value on your balance sheet as well. That's our fundamental problem. And to Steve's point, that's why I believe passionately that business aviation serves business, but the ownership model, which was the question on the board before, doesn't work in today's publicly listed company. The only publicly listed company that I know of in the last 6 months that's bought an aeroplane is controlled by somebody who actually doesn't worry about public perception. So he owns a football team that plays in black and white. So that works, but that is an unusual model. But it is not atypical. What you won't find is a PLC, a British listed PLC in the FTSE 100 today, in today's world, saying to their board, I'm going to invest $70 million, it's not going to produce me a penny worth of cash, and the depreciation rate's going to be at $2 million a month for a quarter. It's not going to happen.
Isn't it though, I mean, for one thing, take it off their balance sheet. There are so many different ways of doing that, and we can easily make them pay, but not have that problem. That's an easy one to solve. Isn't it also a perception issue? I mean, it comes back to the earlier panel that everybody's looking at this as exclusive aircraft, luxury, champagne. But if you were to line it up against the other assets, the corporate assets on the PLC's portfolio, it's a tiny amount of the spend on the Knightsbridge offices or the Central New York or whatever. Let's look at productivity across the scale if we're going to do comparisons like that. I mean, do you have any view on that, Stephen?
Yeah, it's a great point. It's part of the solution. And it takes a little time for the message to sink in. I think, as we all know, the first 5 times you transmit the message, people don't remember it. You have to be persistent, and you have to find the way to shape the message that it actually does sink in the long term. A slightly, maybe historical, moderately depressing point to recognize is that almost everybody in the room here can probably remember that the airline started out as an exclusive, non-populist activity, right? As did ocean liners and everything else, and transportation, start there. And it is really the implementation of technology, and as it progresses, as well as cultural acceptance that democratizes, these forms of transportation. And so I would argue in North America that, maturing market, that's happening. In Europe, that's happening. Certainly in Asia and China, hasn't started happening yet. But the wealth generation in companies and with individuals is growing rapidly enough that it will happen in time.
It's a great example. It's, we need the Southwest, the Ryanair of the airline industry.
And as Brian said, it's coming.
Can I ask you, if you look at the Forbes figures, the Bloomberg figures for all the billionaires in the world, and it seems to be growing exponentially every 3 months, particularly those guys that are fluctuating with the pound, why are we only selling 4,000 aircraft per year? Why is this market so small? Why are we not accessing those millions of billionaires who can afford this?
Too complex.
You think it's just too complex?
Well, I think there's I look at the human dimension of this, and I'm one of those veterans of baby boomers, and I'm in the position of having grandchildren. I've got, and my own kids are in work, business, and I notice a change between their attitude to owning assets and mine. And I wonder about what happens to the generation, my generation, who are the people that have these aeroplanes and have the wealth now. As that wealth transfers to the next generation, it gets diluted. But I think I'm seeing a different approach to owning assets. And Uber is an example of that. I am amazed to see in the US, as often as I go there, the growth of Uber, where people, even now I talk to people I know, no longer own a car. They just have no interest in owning a car. And I see just a change in attitude, and I think we would be well served to think about what's happening demographically and our attitude to asset ownership.
As one of the comments from somebody in the room, perception solution industry should fess up its core business is undoubtedly luxury. Then it's easier to market the emerging utility business built around air taxis. Has anybody got a view on that?
Great.
It's not easy. Yeah, exactly.
It's not exclusively luxury. It is a multitude of things that people do for security, privacy, avoidance of airports, business use. Governments use it a lot. I mean, most governments use it, even though they might deny it. Many senators use it, even though they don't. There is a multitude of use. My hobby horse for the last 6 months has been, let's look at the broad church of our users. Let's not just think it's all about business. The business element is important. I support it. I'm vocally supportive of it. But I like to take a broader view of the whole industry.
Here's one for you, Mark. This is the potential to light a bomb. Could smaller aviation authorities, Cayman Islands, San Marino, etc., alleviate the one-size-fits-all issue without compromising safety?
Difficult to say. I don't know them individually.
Please do.
Yeah, I mean, you guys want to market an experience that principally buys time. Time is the premium. It also needs to be safe, and I guess your clients just want to get on board and know they get to A to B in the quickest amount of time in a safe way. That is a marketable product. I mean, I mentioned it earlier. It's only marketable if other safety standards are, yeah, well, I wouldn't put my OC here. And if you get some countries, some places of registration where that confidence isn't there, then I think you might find some regulators kind of trying to market their wares that actually the substance of what they're doing is very difficult to assess and justify. I don't know the particular ones you're talking about. So for me, from where I sit, we want to have a marketable product. We've got a global reputation and a brand. We want it to be really good. So, I would sell the high-end product at a price and say, come to me. I've already said that. But we've got to be able to put our money where our mouth is. So I don't know what the answer to that is. I think the big answer to me is, and it went back to, I think, what Charlotte was saying, we have to have scalable regulation that is just good enough and not gold-plated in order to deliver success. And as I'm sitting here on the solutions seat, I just want to make one quick offer, which is I'm very happy to sponsor a summit down at Gatwick, a regulatory workshop for half a day, host a visit to the Shared Service Centre. I think people would be interested in that. That is part of the new business model. Brief people on what risk-based regulation is and what we've done in the last 4 years, but then roll our sleeves up, co-sponsor it with Mark, and actually hammer out what are your top 10 regulatory priorities and what are we going to do about it. I mean, we are part of the, I want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem panel. So that's the offer if you want to take it up.
It's a great offer.
Mark and I can discuss it afterwards.
Thank you. On Mark's behalf, we accept willingly. Can I, before I take it to the audience for any questions, can I ask each of you very quickly one line on general solutions and accessing. I mean, one of the issues we have is we keep talking to ourselves and we keep talking to the industry. How do we get this message, whatever message we want to get out there and the solutions we want to get out there, how do we get them to the ears of the people who should be hearing them? Start with Stephen.
We found role models, telling the story for them or having them tell it in the first person being extremely powerful. Finding the people that will have the courage to stand up and say, this airplane does this not only for my company but for the larger society is critically important.
And for your job.
And I'll add one quick thing to what you mentioned. If you do take him up on the offer to sit down and talk about regulations, I hate to drag President Trump into it again, but you may have heard that he offered that for every new regulation that was put out, that the agency involved should decommission 2 old ones. And as soon as he said
Great
that...
idea.
Yeah, I know, it sounds good in the beginning, but then the aviation CEOs of every stripe in the United States thought about that. And when they went in and met with the president, they said, whatever you do, do not do that. We have so many regulations that are critical from a safety point of view that create a market, produce positive outcomes. This 2-for-1 thing is nuts. There's a few we'd like you to get rid of. Yes, let's focus on those. But 2-for-1 is just crazy.
Yeah, no-brainer. It kind of goes back to the same point. Get an acceptable face that is a political champion who has the power in government to lead the cause. That's how you get movement.
Who would that be, just before?
I'm not that good a solution here. You guys are going to have to work that one out.
From my point of view, Uber was so successful because it did it better and did it on a common platform. We know the shift is away from ownership. We know the shift won't be selling aircraft at eBay in 20 years' time. So let's sort out clear pricing, common platform, and giving the customer what he wants, which is access, which is availability, and which is transparent pricing.